So as it turns out, the leaks for the Eurofighter Typhoon, and of course all the other planes of this update, turned out to be true. No surprise there. So today we're looking at the Eurofighter Typhoon. This is the German variant because I think the German one is probably most needed at this point. A lot of people are going to be very happy to see this in the German tech tree, to be able to grind a top tier finally. And with that said, I'm pretty sure that the only difference between all of the Typhoons in the game right now is the fact that the German one does not have the AIM-9M, it has the AIM-9LI, like you see on the F4F Ice, which essentially is an AIM-9M, it just doesn't have the smokeless motor. So depending on what game mode you play, you may or may not care about that. Me, as an ARB player, I don't care. I'd actually probably rather prefer the smoke motor, that way I can see if my missile's actually going to track the target right after I fire it, and that way I can kind of adjust accordingly whether or not that missile's going to actually get me a kill or not, whereas the AIM-9M, you can't see it on its way to the target, so you just kind of have to hope that it gets there. On the other side though, of course, if you're a ground RB player, if you're a sim player, that smokeless motor is a big deal, and you might want to grind the British and the Italian Eurofighter instead. Aside from that, they are all the same to my knowledge. Correct me in the comments down below if I'm wrong, but the ground ordnance kit for all three of them looks just like this on screen here. Great array of ground strike weapons, including brimstones, which are pretty cool, I guess. But now let's talk about the plane and its fighter role, and specifically how it applies to air realistic battles, because that's what I play, that's what I talk about. So what do you get with the Typhoon? You get a lot of countermeasures first and foremost, and that is great to see. 384 I believe, and 64 of those are large caliber, which I would recommend putting all of your flares on that large caliber countermeasure slot. And you're not going to run out of countermeasures with this plane. It's just not going to happen. You can take as much flare, as much chaff as you want. You can drop it extremely sparingly, and I would recommend doing that just to make sure that you actually fool the missile you're trying to fool. And that alone I think is going to put this plane above the Rafale that we also are getting this update, which we will touch on in another video. So the countermeasure count is great. The weapon loadout is also great. You get 6 AIM-120B AMRAAMs, which for those that don't know, the AIM-120A and the AIM-120B are the exact same missile in War Thunder. There's no difference whatsoever, so don't feel bad if your plane only has AIM-120As. It's the same thing. You're not missing out at all by not having the B. And then of course you get your 2 AIM-9Ms in addition to that, or AIM-9LIs, either way. Fantastic loadout. 8 missiles total, 6 of which are active radar homing missiles. You can't complain about that whatsoever. That's something that we see out of like the Mirage, for example, as well as the J-10. Basically most planes that aren't an F-15 or an Su-27 are going to have a similar missile count, and you get some great missiles there. So that right there is two things that there's absolutely nothing to complain about: the countermeasure count and the weapons kit. And that's also two things that are very likely not going to change between the dev server and the live server. So this is where we get to the point in the dev server where I have to clarify that everything's subject to change, yada yada yada. We know that that is very likely untrue, but it is possible that this stuff changes in the future. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the flight model, and I'm talking about the radar. The radar 100% is going to change. I can't really speak on the radar much right now. I'm told that it's a copy pasted Sea Harrier radar, which makes a lot of sense because this thing is utter dookie right now, and it makes it very hard to play with. The HMD doesn't really want to lock anything. The TWS doesn't really want to track anything. It's just not very enjoyable right now to try to work this radar. But again, I fully expect this to change. I don't think it's going to the live server with a Sea Harrier radar, though of course with GAIJIN you truly never know. But more importantly, the thing I want to touch on here that is more than likely going to stay the way it is, at least until the first day of the update, because that seems to be GAIJIN's typical pattern for the time being, is the flight model. The flight model on this plane is a little bit of hit and miss. There's some things I like about it, some things I don't like about it. As far as the dueling and dogfight performance of the planes go, I have no idea right now, guys. I'm just kind of going by how the plane feels, but I'm not going to really speak on the dueling side of things at the moment. Of course, because things can change, but more importantly, just people haven't gotten to test them that need to test them. But there is a big difference between a dueling flight model and an air RB flight model. You can have a great flight model for 1 versus 1 engagements, but not a great flight model for your typical air RB gameplay. And that's something why, for example, the F-15 ENCs are so successful in air realistic battles. Sure, they're kind of a boat in a dogfight. They lose to most of the top tier planes besides the Russians, but their flight model in the typical air RB situation is so good combined with their missile kit, of course, that they see a lot of success. And the Typhoon just isn't quite there. I suspect that this plane's probably going to be a very strong 1 versus 1 dogfight plane. I assume when everything's all said and done, that will be the case. But as far as its air realistic flight model goes, I think that the F-15E is still on top right now for the ARB flight model. I know this is not a video where I'm just going to complain about the F-15E. I really don't have any problems with the F-15E right now. I think it's in a pretty decent spot. But the Eurofighter Typhoon, while being a great plane, and I suspect it will come to the game as a great plane and definitely something worth playing, I don't think it's going to take the F-15E spot as the #1 plane right now to play in a typical 16 versus 16 a realistic battle setting, at least as a solo anyways as well. And the reason being is just the speed bleed of this flight model is very suboptimal for a BVR style engagement, or really active radar homing missile engagements in general. This plane pulls very hard, and it pulls very hard at pretty much every speed, even when you're going very fast. As a matter of fact, this plane goes extremely fast. I bet a lot of US mains are going to be pretty upset to see that this plane goes Mach 2 extremely easily. And in a straight line, I think this thing is about as fast as the pre-nerf F-15E. The problem being is that it can't go past Mach 2, and once you start pulling whatsoever, your speed just starts going down the toilet. Unlike the F-15E, even the nerfed one, it goes to about Mach 1.8 pretty reliably these days, but the big thing is that when you're full pulling on the elevator, it still really doesn't lose that much speed when you're going that fast, so you can maintain that very high speed very easily. Sure, the the Typhoon might be able to get a little bit faster than the nerfed F-15. Like I said, it gets to Mach 2 in a straight line extremely quickly, and that's great and all, but once you maneuver, you're going to lose that extremely rapidly, and unfortunately you cannot win a BVR fight by simply just flying straight. And then of course I do believe I mentioned that it does rip pretty much right after Mach 2, so no Mach 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 even, anything crazy like that we saw with the F-15E before the nerf. So no, this is not the same thing. So to summarize my first impressions of the Eurofighter Typhoon, I think this plane is going to be fantastic. I think it's going to be something definitely worth grinding for, but I just don't think it's going to be as meta as the F-15E, because that's going to be a really hard plane to top for the foreseeable future for a 16 versus 16 air realistic battle. I think this plane is going to be very competitive. I think it's going to be good at dogfighting, and that's something you need as a competitive plane, but do not worry, your F-15 is going to be just fine still. So I hope you guys enjoyed. We'll be out with new videos very soon. I'll see ya.